Bennett, a quiet war hero, faced yet another challenge as his airline ticket was dismissed as invalid by an unfeeling airport staff. But what they didn't know was that Harold's story wasn't just any story. It was a tale of courage, sacrifice, and lives saved in the heat of battle. Enter Andrew Taylor, the owner of the airline, who, after overhearing the disrespectful treatment, realized he couldn't just stand by. What followed was a journey of redemption, respect, and a life-changing decision that would not only honor Harold's legacy, but inspire a cultural shift across an entire company. Watch as one man's story changes everything. Harold Bennett shuffled toward the boarding gate, his cane tapping ever so softly on the gleaming airport floor, each step a quiet testament to a life well lived. His faded army jacket draped loosely over his frail frame, its patches frayed from years of wear, each stitch carrying memories of battles fought and brothers lost. Beneath his worn cap, wisps of white hair framed his weathered face, and his eyes, oh those eyes, though tired, they sparkled with a quiet pride that no years could dim. Flying to Seattle? It wasn't a big deal to him, just a trip to honor his old military unit at a ceremony. Harold wasn't one for fuss, never had been, but he knew he had to show up. Why? Because so few of his comrades were still around to stand tall at such events, and that weighed heavy on his heart. At the gate, a young woman named Samantha, her name tag gleaming under the harsh airport lights, glanced at Harold as he handed over his boarding pass. Her smile flickered, just for a split second, before she forced it back into place. "Sir," she said, her voice polite but edged with firmness, "this ticket is invalid for this flight." Harold's brows furrowed in confusion. "That can't be right," he exclaimed softly. "I bought it a month ago. Checked it twice." Samantha's eyes betrayed a flash of impatience as she scanned the pass again, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we've already assigned that seat to another passenger. You'll have to wait here while we sort this out." Harold let out a weary sigh. He'd flown plenty of times before, hadn't he, and these mix-ups weren't new. "All right," he muttered, stepping aside as a flood of passengers rushed past him toward the jet bridge, their lives moving faster than his old bones could. Unbeknownst to him, a man in his mid-30s stood nearby, leaning casually against a pillar, watching the scene unfold. Dressed in a simple black hoodie and jeans, Andrew Taylor looked like just another traveler. But oh, how appearances deceive. Andrew was no ordinary passenger. He was the owner of Taylor Aviation, the very airline Harold was trying to board. He made a habit of blending in, quietly observing how his staff treated the people who kept his business aloft. Andrew's sharp eyes narrowed as he caught Samantha whispering to a coworker. Their words drifted to him, sharp and careless. "It's overbooked. He'll probably make a scene, easier to just not let him on." Andrew's jaw clenched tight. What was this? He wasn't quick to judge, but something about their tone gnawed at him, like a splinter under the skin. His gaze shifted back to Harold, standing patiently to the side, his cane trembling just a bit under his grip. How could they treat him like this? Minutes dragged on, 10, then 15, each one heavier than the last. Passengers boarded, some tossing sympathetic glances Harold's way, others too caught up in their own worlds to notice. Samantha returned, her face a mask of practiced neutrality. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, but there's no seat for you on this flight," she said, her words flat. Harold blinked, stunned. "No seat? I paid for my ticket. I've got a ceremony to get to." Andrew, lingering nearby, perked up, his heart racing as he pretended to fiddle with his phone, eavesdropping on the exchange. Samantha's tone had turned cold, dismissive, as if she just wanted Harold to disappear. Harold straightened, his voice steady but firm, a spark of the soldier he once was shining through. "I'm not asking for special treatment, ma'am. I just want the seat I paid for." A smirk flickered across Samantha's lips, and Andrew's stomach twisted. "Sir, let's not make this difficult," she said. "We can rebook you for tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Harold opened his mouth to protest, but froze when a small boy nearby tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the medals pinned to Harold's jacket. "Mom, look at the boy whispered, eyes wide. The mother offered Harold a tight, awkward smile before hurrying her son away, as if his presence unsettled her. Andrew had seen enough. He couldn't stand by any longer. He stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Excuse me, What's the problem here? Samantha flinched, her professional facade cracking for a heartbeat. Oh, no problem, she stammered. We're just assisting this passenger. Assisting him by denying his seat? Andrew shot back. One eyebrow raised. Harold glanced at him, surprised by this stranger's boldness. It's all right, son, Harold said, waving a hand. I'll figure it out. But Andrew wasn't having it. He has a valid ticket, doesn't he? He pressed, his voice firm. Samantha hesitated, caught off guard. Yes, but then he should be allowed to board. Andrew's tone sharpened, cutting through her excuses. Overbooking is your mistake, not his. Samantha's cheeks flushed red. I'll see what I can do, she mumbled, scurrying off to consult a colleague. Andrew turned to Harold with a small, reassuring smile. I'm Andrew. Mind if I stick around to make sure they don't give you the runaround? Harold chuckled, a warm, gravelly sound. Suit yourself, young man. I appreciate it. As they waited, Andrew struck up a conversation with Harold, eager to know more. He learned Harold had served in the Korean War, that he was heading to Seattle to reunite with the few remaining members of his unit for an awards ceremony. Harold spoke humbly, brushing off the details of his service, but Andrew could sense the weight of his experiences. How could someone so remarkable be treated so poorly? Eventually, Samantha returned, her expression sour as old milk. We've found a seat, sir, she said, but it's not in economy. It's in the last row by the restroom. Harold's shoulders sagged, but he nodded. That'll do. Andrew's blood boiled. That's unacceptable, he exclaimed. He paid for a specific seat. Samantha's forced smile returned, thin and brittle. It's the best we can do. Andrew's gaze turned steely. He wanted to reveal who he was right then, to call out her behavior in front of everyone. But something stopped him. There was more to this, wasn't there? He needed to see how it played out. As Harold shuffled toward the plane, Andrew followed, his mind a whirlwind. Something about Harold tugged at him, a nagging feeling he couldn't shake. Then it happened. Harold stumbled, his duffel bag slipping from his grip, and a glint of metal spilled out. A metal, old but polished to a shine. Andrew's heart stopped as he knelt to help. When he picked it up, his breath caught. Distinguished Service Cross. He'd seen that very medal on his late grandfather's mantle, heard the stories of valor tied to it. His hands shook as he handed it back to Harold. Could it be? Was this the Harold Bennett his grandfather had spoken of with such reverence? Andrew trailed Harold down the aisle, his thoughts racing. His grandfather, Richard Taylor, had shared countless tales of Korea, stories of courage, camaraderie, and a man named Harold Bennett, a soldier of unshakable integrity, who'd saved lives, including his own. And now here was Harold, older, frailer, treated like a nuisance by Andrew's own airline. Harold settled into the cramped last row, the hum of the engines drowning out Andrew's footsteps as he lingered a few rows ahead, pretending to check his phone. That medal, it was identical to his grandfather's. So few earned such an honor, and even fewer carried it with Harold's humility. Andrew had to know more. The flight attendants bustled through their pre-flight checks, Samantha's sharp voice crackling over the intercom, urging passengers to prepare for takeoff. Andrew bided his time. He couldn't let this moment slip, but he didn't want to overwhelm Harold either. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the cabin filled with soft coughs and murmurs. Harold leaned back, eyes closed, his hand resting protectively on his duffel bag. Andrew took a deep breath and made his move, strolling casually to the back. Mind if I sit here for a bit? He asked, nodding at the empty seat beside Harold. Harold squinted, then nodded. Sure, young man, long as you don't mind the smell, he quipped, gesturing to the nearby restroom. Andrew laughed, easing into the seat. I've had work. After a pause, he ventured. That's an impressive medal you've got. Distinguished Service Cross, right? Harold's eyes widened in surprise. Not many recognize it these days, he said, his fingers brushing the metal through the bag's fabric. My grandfather had one, Andrew said, keeping his tone light. He'd tell me about the men he served with, said they were the real heroes. Harold's smile was soft, knowing. Your grandfather must have been one of them then. Andrew chose his next words carefully. He talked a lot about a Harold Bennett, said he wouldn't be alive without him. Harold's expression shifted, his smile fading into something deeper, pride. Yes, but laced with sadness. Richard Taylor, he murmured. I remember him. Fine soldier, good man. Andrew's chest tightened. That was my grandfather. Harold turned to him, his gaze sharp despite his age. "You're Richard's grandson." Andrew nodded, emotions swelling within him. "He said you saved his life, that he owed you everything." Harold's lips pressed thin, his eyes dropping to his hand. "Your grandfather was braver than he let on. Kept our unit together when it all fell apart. We lost so many good men." Andrew let the words sink in, heavy and solemn. "Why didn't he tell me what you did?" he asked. Harold chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Men like Richard didn't linger on the past, didn't want their families carrying that weight. What I did, just part of the job." Andrew shook his head. "Not everyone would have done it." Harold shrugged. "Maybe, but I don't dwell on it." Samantha interrupted, her tight smile back in place. "Sir, you need to return to your seat," she said to Andrew. Her voice clipped. Andrew met her gaze coolly. "I'm fine here." Her jaw tightened. "It's against policy to block the aisle near the restroom." "I'm in a seat, not blocking anything," Andrew retorted. Harold cleared his throat. "It's okay, son. Don't stir trouble for me." Andrew bit back a sharp reply and stood. "I'll be back," he promised Harold, shooting Samantha a look as he returned to his room. Alone again, Andrew's mind churned. This was the Harold Bennett his grandfather had revered. No doubt about it. But there was more. Something Harold wasn't saying, hidden in his pauses, his reluctance to talk about himself. What burden was he carrying? Andrew scrolled through his emails, finding a message about his airline's new veteran outreach initiative. The irony stung. Here was a hero, treated like a problem by his own staff. He leaned back, a plan forming. He wouldn't just apologize, he'd make this right. As the plane descended, Andrew slipped back to Harold's seat, ignoring the flight attendant's glances. "When we land, can I buy you a coffee?" he asked quietly. "There's something I want to share." Harold raised an eyebrow but nodded. "All right, son, I've got time." Andrew's heart lifted. This was just the start. He'd make sure Harold Bennett got the respect he deserved, not just for his grandfather's sake, but for everything this humble hero represented. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, but the flurry of passengers gathering their belongings barely registered with Andrew. His heart was set on Harold. Oh, what a man. He felt a burning responsibility, not just for what Harold had done for his grandfather, but for the very essence of courage and sacrifice he embodied. Why did this feel so personal? As the cabin buzzed with the usual post-flight chaos, Andrew stayed close to Harold, his silent vow echoing in his mind. By the end of this day, Harold Bennett would know the respect he deserved. The Seattle airport was a whirlwind of noise and motion, but Andrew and Harold found a quiet haven in a cozy cafe near the baggage claim. Harold eased himself into a chair, his cane propped against the table like an old friend, while Andrew ordered 2 steaming cups of coffee. When he returned, he set one in front of Harold and slid into the seat across from him. For a moment, silence wrapped them like a warm blanket. Harold stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, his eyes lost in the swirling liquid, as if it held memories too heavy to voice. Andrew leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice soft but earnest. "I meant every word back on the plane, Harold. I need to hear more of your story. My grandfather talked about you all the time, but I never grasped just how much you meant to him." Harold glanced up, his expression a mystery, unreadable yet deep. "Your grandfather was a good man, Andrew. He didn't need to make a big deal out of me." Andrew shook his head, a spark of frustration in his eyes. "You saved his life, didn't you?" "Come on, Harold." Harold sighed, setting the spoon down with a faint clink. "We saved each other out there. That's how it works in war, son. You don't think about yourself. You think about the man next to you. That's what Richard and I did. Plain and simple." Andrew frowned, sensing Harold's reluctance to dive deeper. "But there's more, isn't there? He always mentioned one day, one that changed everything. What happened?" Harold's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee, the steam curling around his weathered fingers. He took a long, slow sip, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There was a day, yes, the worst day of my life." Andrew held his breath, giving Harold the space to decide how much to share. After a pause that felt like an eternity, Harold continued, his eyes distant, as if peering into the past. "It was early 1951, Andrew. We were deep in enemy territory, cut off from reinforcements. The cold, it was brutal, biting into your bones. Morale, lower than the frozen ground we stood on. Our unit was tasked with holding a critical position, but we all knew it was a suicide mission. Impossible." Andrew listened, his coffee forgotten, his heart pounding as he hung on every word. "Richard and I were in a small squad, sent to scout ahead.
We walked right into an ambush, bullets flying from every direction. Half our squad was gone in minutes. Just the rest of us scrambled for cover. But it was pure chaos. Richard took a hit in the leg, and we were pinned down, trapped. Harold paused, his grip tightening on the cup, knuckles whitening. I had a choice: leave him behind to save myself, or risk everything to get him out. I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed him, dragged him through the enemy fire, step by agonizing step. By some miracle, we made it back to the unit. Andrew's chest tightened, the scene vivid in his mind. And that's how you earned Distinguished Service Cross. Harold shook his head, a faint scoff escaping his lips. No, son, that was just the beginning. Saving Richard was one thing, but the real fight came later. The enemy launched an all-out assault, 10 of them for every one of us. Our lieutenant fell, and I had to take command. We held that line for hours, Andrew. Hours, long enough for reinforcements to arrive. That's why they gave me the medal. Not for saving Richard, but for holding that cursed hill. Andrew's throat tightened, his voice barely above a whisper. You make it sound so simple, Harold, but it wasn't. You saved lives, my grandfather's included. Harold's gaze hardened, his eyes glinting with a mix of resolve and pain. I did what I had to do, but the truth, I've carried the weight of that day ever since. The men we lost, the horrors we saw. Medals don't wipe that away, Andrew. They never do. Andrew fell silent, letting Harold's words settle like dust after a storm. I think my grandfather knew that, he said finally. He always said the bravest men carry the heaviest burdens. Isn't that true? Harold's faint smile was tinged with warmth. Richard had a way with words, didn't he? Andrew hesitated, his heart racing as he prepared to reveal the truth. There's something I need to tell you, Harold. I wasn't just a passenger on that flight. I own Taylor Aviation. Harold's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. But he stayed quiet, waiting. I started this airline to honor my grandfather's memory. Andrew continued, his voice thick with emotion. He taught me about integrity, about treating people. And today, oh Harold, today I failed you. My staff failed you, and I'm ashamed. Harold waved a hand, dismissive yet kind. Son, you don't need to apologize for them. It wasn't your fault. Andrew leaned closer, his voice firm, almost fierce. No, I did. The way you were treated was wrong. Unacceptable. You deserve so much better. And I swear I'll make sure this never happens again. Not to you or anyone else. Harold studied him for a long moment, his eyes softening. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Andrew. Truly. The conversation lightened after that, Harold sharing more stories of his time with Richard, each tale a glimpse into a bond forged in fire. Andrew soaked in every word, marveling at the depth of their friendship. Hours slipped by unnoticed, and when Harold glanced at the clock, he frowned. I've kept you long enough, haven't I? He said, rising slowly, his cane steadying him. Andrew stood, grinning. You haven't kept me at all, but there's one more thing I want to do. What's that, you ask? Harold raised an eyebrow, curious. Andrew's smile widened. Just wait here. Minutes later, Andrew returned with a Taylor Aviation representative, a woman carrying a neatly folded envelope. Andrew placed a hand on Harold's shoulder, his voice warm. This is a lifetime pass for unlimited flights. First class. Every time. It's the least I can do. Harold's eyes widened, and for a moment he was speechless. Then he chuckled, a soft, disbelieving sound. You don't have to do that, son. I know, Andrew said, his tone resolute, but I want to. It's a small way to thank you for what you did for my grandfather, and for this country.
Harold stared at the envelope, then met Andrew's gaze, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Andrew. This means a lot. Andrew's smile was radiant. No, Harold, thank you for everything. As they shook hands, Andrew felt a clarity he hadn't known in years. This wasn't just about honoring Harold, it was about ensuring every veteran, every passenger was treated with the dignity they deserved. And he was determined to make it happen. Leaving the cafe, Harold's stories lingered in Andrew's mind, their weight of bravery, sacrifice, and loss etching deep into his soul. As they walked through the terminal, Andrew noticed how people passed Harold by, oblivious to the hero in their midst. A man who'd risked everything for their freedoms, and yet he was invisible to them. Andrew's jaw tightened, the memory of the flight crew's dismissal burning in his chest. How could they make Harold feel so small? Harold, Andrew said as they neared the exit, I know you don't like dwelling on the past, But have you ever shared your story publicly? I mean, really shared it? Harold chuckled, leaning on his cane. Not much, son. Most folks don't care for old war story. They've got their own troubles, don't they? Andrew frowned, his voice urgent. I think you're wrong, Harold. Your story matters. If people knew the sacrifices you made, they'd treat you and every veteran with the respect you've earned. Harold shrugged, his expression unreadable.
Maybe.
But respect? You don't demand it. You earn it. Andrew stopped, turning to face him, his eyes blazing. You've earned it 100 times over. This isn't just about you. It's about every veteran who's been overlooked, disrespected. Your story is a reminder of what we owe those who served. Harold tilted his head, studying Andrew. You're serious about this, aren't you? Andrew nodded, his voice steady. Dead serious. I'm going to make this airline a leader in honoring veterans, and you've given me the inspiration to start. That evening, Andrew sat in his office, his heart full as he drafted a proposal to transform how Taylor Aviation treated veterans. Harold's humility, his quiet strength, the pain he carried from the war, they demanded more than acknowledgement. They demanded action. By the time he finished, he'd outlined the Honor Flight Initiative, starting with small but meaningful changes: priority boarding for veterans, complimentary first-class upgrades when available, and personalized recognition for those with military IDs. But Andrew's vision stretched further. He dreamed of partnerships with veterans organizations, discounted flights for military families, and events celebrating their contributions. Most of all, he wanted stories like Harold's to be heard. He planned a platform where veterans could share their experiences, connecting passengers to the real people behind the uniforms. If people understood the sacrifices made, wouldn't it spark a culture of respect and gratitude? A week later, Andrew invited Harold back to the airport for a special meeting. Harold stepped into the conference room, his cane tapping softly, his expression skeptical. What's all this about, Andrew? He asked, eyeing the group seated at the table. Andrew smiled, warm and reassuring. Harold, these are my senior staff. I want them to meet you and hear your story. Harold shifted, uneasy. I'm not sure I'm the right guy for this. Andrew's hand rested on his shoulder. You are, Harold. Trust me. Harold hesitated, then nodded, settling at the head of the table, his hands on his cane. When he spoke, his voice was steady, unpolished, but oh so powerful. He shared tales of his unit's camaraderie, the sacrifices they made, the men they lost. He spoke of pride in serving his country and the guilt he carried for those who never came home. By the time he finished, the room was silent, eyes glistening with tears. Even the toughest executives were moved, their faces softened with respect. What an end. Afterward, Andrew pulled Harold aside, his voice brimming with pride. You changed something today. Harold, you're starting to see how much your story matters, aren't you? Harold's faint smile held a new warmth. Maybe you're right, son. It felt good to talk, like I was honoring the men who didn't make it back. You were, Andrew exclaimed. And this is just the beginning. He handed Harold a folder detailing the Honor Flight Initiative. As Harold read, his eyes widened. You're really doing all that? He asked, disbelief in his voice. Andrew nodded, his gaze unwavering. Because of you, Harold. Because of what you represent. I want no veteran to ever feel the way you did when they denied your seat. This program, it's my way of honoring you and every veteran like you. Harold's hand trembled as he closed the folder, his voice soft. Thank you, Andrew. This means more than I can say. Andrew's smile was radiant. You don't need to say a thing, Harold. Just know your story made a difference. A week after Harold's heartfelt meeting with Andrew, Taylor Aviation buzzed with anticipation for a small, secret event to launch the Honor Flight Initiative. The announcement was hushed, shared only with a select few, and Samantha received her invitation with no clue what awaited. A routine training, maybe. A policy update. She strolled into the conference room, her eyes darting across unfamiliar faces, but her heart plummeted when she spotted Harold Bennett at the head of the room, his cane resting beside him like a silent sentinel. Oh no. Memories of her cold dismissal at the boarding gate flooded back, guilt twisting in her chest like a knife. Samantha slipped into a seat near the back, praying she'd go unnoticed. At the front, Andrew stood casually dressed but radiating an authority that filled the room. Samantha didn't recognize him. Hadn't he just been another passenger on that flight? Maybe an organizer or someone from a veterans group. Andrew's warm welcome snapped her attention back, his voice steady yet commanding. Thank you all for being here today. We're here to honor a man whose story has sparked real change, not just for our airline, but in how we treat every single passenger who walks through our doors. Can you feel the weight of that? Samantha's gaze flicked nervously to Harold, his calm, unreadable expression doing little to ease her dread. Did he even see her? Andrew's voice pulled her back. Before we go further, let me introduce a special guest, he said, gesturing toward Harold with pride. This is Mr. Harold Bennett, a decorated war veteran who embodies courage, humility, and service. Harold rose slowly, offering a modest nod as polite applause rippled through the crowd. Samantha's cheeks burned as she clapped hesitantly, each clap intensifying the guilt gnawing at her. How could she have treated him so poorly? As Harold began sharing a brief story of his service, his voice quiet but powerful, Samantha's stomach churned. She wanted to melt into her chair, to vanish entirely. She hadn't known who Harold was that day at the gate, hadn't even cared to ask. Now his words, laced with sacrifice and honor, pressed down on her like a heavy fog. When Harold finished, Andrew stepped forward, his voice sharpening, cutting through the room. Mr. Bennett's story shines a light on the sacrifices veterans have made for our country. But it also reveals something else. How easy it is to overlook those who've given everything. And that, my friends, is something we as an airline will not allow. Andrew's gaze swept the room, locking onto Samantha with an intensity that stole her breath. Was he talking about her? Sometimes our mistakes come from ignorance, he continued, his tone calm but unyielding. Sometimes from assumptions, and sometimes from forgetting our duty to treat every passenger with dignity. Have we forgotten that? Samantha's heart pounded, her palms clamped. Andrew's voice grew firmer. Last week, one of our staff failed in that duty. They dismissed Mr. Bennett, treated him as if he didn't matter. That wasn't just one person's failure, it was a failure of our values. Samantha's pulse raced as Andrew's eyes bored into her. He stepped closer, his expression steady but piercing. Samantha, he said, his voice slicing through the silence. Do you remember Mr. Bennett? Her face paled, her voice a whisper. Yes, Andrew nodded, unyielding. And do you remember me? Samantha blinked, confusion swirling. You were on the flight, weren't you? I was, Andrew said, his tone sharpening like a blade. But I wasn't just another passenger. I'm Andrew Taylor, and I own this airline. The room fell deathly silent. Samantha's mouth parted, but no words came. Her face flushed a deep, burning red. As the truth hit her like a tidal wave, she dismissed a war hero right in front of the airline's owner. Andrew didn't linger on her discomfort. You didn't know who I was, and that's fine. I wasn't there to draw attention to myself, but you didn't know who Mr. Bennett was either. And that's the problem. You didn't take the time to find out, Samantha. You judged him by his appearance, treated him like he was less than the others. How could you? Samantha's voice quivered, barely audible. Miss Taylor, I didn't mean to. Andrew raised a hand, stopping her. Intent doesn't matter, Samantha. Actions do. What you did wasn't just disrespectful. It was a missed chance to honor someone who deserved so much more. Tears welled in Samantha's eyes, spilling over. I'm so sorry. I didn't know, I didn't realize. Andrew's tone softened, just a touch. That's why we're here today. Not to shame you, but to make sure this never happens again. This isn't just about Mr. Bennett. It's about every veteran, every passenger, who deserves respect and dignity. Don't we owe them that? Andrew turned to Harold, his voice warm. Mr. Bennett, is there anything you'd like to say? Harold met Samantha's tearful gaze, his expression thoughtful, almost kind. We all make mistakes, young lady, he said gently. What matters is what you do next. I don't need an apology. I need to know you've learned something. Samantha nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. I have. I promise I'll do better. Andrew addressed the room, his voice resolute. Moving forward, every staff member will undergo training to better serve our veterans and passengers with the dignity they deserve. This isn't just a policy change, it's a commitment to the values we stand for. As the meeting ended, Samantha approached Harold hesitantly. Her voice, Mr. Bennett, I can't undo what I did, but your story has changed me. Thank you for teaching me a lesson I'll never forget. Harold's warm smile eased her guilt.
It's never too late to learn, young lady, and I think you'll do just fine. Samantha left the room, her heart brimming with purpose, determined to honor Harold and every veteran she met. Andrew watched her go, confident the lesson had taken root. 2 months later, the Honor Flight Initiative was in full swing across Taylor Aviation. Veterans now enjoyed priority boarding, complimentary upgrades when available, and heartfelt recognition from staff. The program had caught fire, earning praise from veterans organizations and passengers alike. What a transformation! But Andrew knew the biggest moment was still ahead. Today, Taylor Aviation would unveil a new addition to its fleet, a plane dedicated to Harold Bennett and all who served. He'd kept it a secret from Harold, wanting to surprise him with the recognition he'd earned 1,000 times over. Harold arrived at the hangar, leaning on his cane, his eyes curious as Andrew greeted him with a beaming smile. "Good to see you, Harold," Andrew said, shaking his hand firmly. "Good to see you too, son," Harold replied. "But what's all this fuss about? You're keeping me in the dark." Andrew chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "You'll see soon enough." The hangar buzzed with airline employees, veterans, and reporters. Samantha stood near the front, her demeanor utterly transformed. She'd embraced her role as an advocate for the Honor Flight Initiative, going above and beyond to ensure every veteran felt valued. As the crowd hushed, Andrew stepped onto a small stage before a massive, covered aircraft, the microphone crackling to life. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, his voice steady and confident. "Today is a monumental day for Taylor Aviation. We're not just celebrating the Honor Flight Initiative's success, we're honoring the people who made it possible." He gestured toward Harold, seated in the front row. Mr. Harold Bennett is one of those people. His courage, his humility, his story, they inspired us to create a program that ensures no veteran is ever overlooked. But words? They're not enough for someone like Harold. So we did something bigger. With a nod, Andrew signaled for the cover to drop. The crowd gasped as the banner fell, revealing a gleaming aircraft adorned with a stunning mural, a soldier saluting against an American flag, the plane's tail emblazoned with bold letters, "Harold Bennett, a legacy of courage." Harold's eyes widened, his mouth dropping open. He gripped his cane, hands trembling. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of admiration washing over the hangar. Andrew stepped off the stage, kneeling beside Harold, his voice thick with emotion. "This plane is dedicated to you and every veteran who's ever served. Every time it flies, it'll carry your legacy." Harold blinked rapidly, struggling to process the sight. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his voice shaky. "You don't have to say a thing," Andrew replied, his eyes misty. "This is for you, for everything you've done." Samantha approached as the applause roared on, her eyes shining with admiration. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, "thank you for your service, your patience, and for giving me a chance to grow. I'll never forget what you taught me." Harold's smile was warm, genuine. "You've done good, young lady. Keep it up." As the ceremony wrapped up, Harold stood with Andrew by the plane, posing for photos and fielding reporters' questions. Yet despite the spotlight, he remained humble, deflecting praise to the men he'd served with. "What a man." As the crowd thinned, Harold turned to Andrew, his voice soft. "You didn't have to do all this, you know." "I did," Andrew said firmly. "It's not just about you, Harold. It's about ensuring every veteran is remembered, honored. You've inspired something bigger than us both." Harold nodded, his eyes misty. "Then I'm glad I could help." As Harold boarded the plane for its inaugural flight, a symbolic journey carrying veterans and their families, Andrew watched, pride swelling in his chest. The airline had transformed, not just in policy but in spirit, becoming a place where every story mattered. As the plane's engines roared, Harold gazed out the window, his name on the tail sparking a rare, radiant smile. For the first time in ages, he felt truly seen, not just as a veteran, but as a man whose life had made a difference. Andrew turned to Samantha, who stood beside him, watching the plane soar. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice brimming with hope. She nodded, her eyes bright. "Thanks to you and Mr. Bennett, it's a beginning we can all be proud of." The plane climbed higher, carrying not just passengers, but a legacy of courage, respect, and change. Harold Bennett's name would soar across the skies, a reminder that every life holds a story worth honoring, and every story can inspire a world of difference.